What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue here with my 2024 college football schedule preview and projected record series. The Wisconsin Badgers are up next before we preview their schedule for 2024 and give them an early projected record based on how tough their schedule is. Let's take a look back at what Wisconsin did in 2023. Here were my projections and predictions last year for the Wisconsin Badgers. My projection had them at 7-5, and then my prediction for them was also 7-5, and that's exactly what Wisconsin did here compared to my projection and predictions last year. Wisconsin going 7-5 in 2023 in the regular season, but 7-6 overall if you count their bowl game loss at the end of the year. So not a very bad season for Wisconsin. I think this was definitely where I expected Wisconsin to be. A lot of people were really high on this team, predicted them to win like 9 or 10 games, and also called them a top 25 team. Don't get me wrong, they had the talent to be a top 25 team, but it was a first-year head coach with Luke Fickell and everything, so I really didn't expect Wisconsin to make it to the Big Ten championship, but they still made it to a bowl game. That's the good news there. So I was right on the money with Wisconsin's prediction last year and projection for this team. Here was the schedule last year for the Badgers. You look at their non-conference schedule. Had to play Buffalo, Washington State here on the road out of the Pac-12, and then, of course, play Georgia Southern, so they didn't really have a tough non-conference schedule. And then you look at the 5 losses, like we just mentioned. They did lose to Washington State here on September the 9th on the road. And then you look at the Big Ten losses here in the conference. They lost to Iowa there at home here on October the 14th. They lost to Ohio State here at home on October 28th. And then they lost to Indiana on the road and then Northwestern here at home. So they ended up losing 3 straight games there from October 28th to November 11th, and the schedule wasn't really tough last year. You had, your big games at home from last year, except for that Washington State game. But again, this was a pretty easy schedule for Wisconsin. But again, that Indiana game, you look at that one on November 4th, that was a very unacceptable loss. So if the Badgers would have beaten Indiana, took care of business in that game, this team probably could have been like 8-4 last year and possibly made a run for the Big Ten championship. And if also they would have beaten Iowa, that definitely would have been putting them in the Big Ten championship as well. But that's a look back at 2023. Let's now look ahead to 2024. And here is the schedule for Wisconsin heading into the upcoming season. Before we go game by game, let's take a look at who the Badgers will play in the non-conference this upcoming season. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will play Western Michigan, South Dakota, a couple of, like cupcake games here on the schedule. And then, of course, they have that big non-conference game against Alabama here in week number 3. That's a very tough non-conference game there for Wisconsin, but the good news about this non-conference game against the Crimson Tide, you do get this game at home at least, so that's the good news there if you're a Wisconsin fan. But even though it's Alabama, when you play Alabama in the non-conference, it makes the non-conference schedule a little bit tougher. But again, a couple of, non-conference games that are not very tough, and then you got that one big game here against Alabama, which does make it a very tough non-conference schedule here for 2024. But again, they will play Alabama at home. That's the good news there. So that's a look at the non-conference schedule for Wisconsin. Let's go back to the schedule now for 2024. And they will start things off, of course, with Western Michigan here on August 31st. And then after that, they do play South Dakota here on September the 7th. And then they have that big game here against Alabama on September the 14th. So the Badgers will play their 3 non-conference games to kick off the season. Then they get a bye week here right after the Alabama game, and then they come out of the bye week. They'll play USC here on the road to open up Big Ten play on September the 28th. One of those newcomers coming up here, of course, for the upcoming season in the Big Ten. You rather have that bye week, though, right before the Alabama game if you're a Wisconsin fan, before a big game against Alabama. But the bye week comes here before their first true road game against USC. Then they get to the month of October. They'll play Purdue here at home on October the 5th, and then they go on the road to face Rutgers here on October the 12th. Then it's Northwestern on the road on October 19th, so they got back-to-back road games here with Rutgers and Northwestern. Not a very tough back-to-back road games, but these are definitely trap games here for Wisconsin. Rutgers and Northwestern definitely very much surprised a lot of people last year. And then you got Penn State here, another big game here at home on October 26th, and then they get to the month of November. There's that big game on the road at Iowa on November 2nd. and then they get their second bye week here in the second weekend of the month of November before a big game here at home against Oregon on November 16th. And that's a pretty good spot for a bye week if you're a Wisconsin fan. I really like this where this bye week is here for the Wisconsin Badgers. And again, they play Oregon here on November 16th, one of those other newcomers coming up here in the Big Ten this year. And then they get Nebraska here on the road on November 23rd. And then they close things out here with Minnesota on November 30th. So that is the schedule for Wisconsin in 2024. A pretty tough schedule when you got Alabama, and Oregon and Penn State here on the schedule. But these are three of their most important games of the season. And you get all three of these big games here at home, which is the good news here for the Wisconsin Badgers. And then also, you got some tough road games with Rutgers, Northwestern, and those back-to-back road games. You also got USC on the road, Iowa on the road, Nebraska on the road as well. But I don't think this is a really tough schedule, to be honest, for Wisconsin. But again, when you got Alabama and Penn State and Oregon on the schedule, you get all those games at home, but it's still a tough schedule either way. So let's now get a projection here for Wisconsin for 2024. And again, this is not an official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is. And this is the scale I use here for my projections. If it's a 1% game in the red, that is a percentage that's going to count as an automatic loss there for Wisconsin here in this percentage. 20% games in the orange are going to be games where there'll be about a couple touchdowns of underdogs. 40% games in the yellow, they're going to be games where about a heavy underdog game by about a touchdown. 50-50 games will, of course, stay in the white. Games I think can go either way. 60% games in the purple are going to be games where Wisconsin will be favored by at least a touchdown. 80% games here in the blue, they'll be favored by a couple touchdowns and also by double digits. And then the green games at 99% are going to be counted as the automatic wins here for Wisconsin. And that's the percentage I'm going to start here with Wisconsin here for 2024. So we'll start with the green games here for the Badgers for 2024. The easy wins here on this schedule at 99% here in the green. I think you've got a couple of them that you can favor Wisconsin here by more than 3 touchdowns, and that's Western Michigan and South Dakota. Perhaps your 2 easiest games here on the schedule here for 2024, and probably your cupcake games as well. So I think they take care of business in both of these games. There's no really big reason why they should lose both of these games as well. And I think these are 2 games that you probably can score maybe over 20 points and maybe over 30 points as well. So I do expect Wisconsin to go out there and take care of business against both of these teams. So these are counted as automatic wins here for Wisconsin. Let's now go to the blue games where Wisconsin will be favored by a couple touchdowns and also by double digits. And I got one game here in the blue, and that's Purdue here at home on October the 5th. I know this is a game that could be in the green, but, this is a Big Ten game, and we don't really know how good Purdue is going to be. And also, I don't know how good Wisconsin is going to be either, because it's kind of early to tell what these teams are going to look like based off of last year and also based off of the rosters, so far this upcoming season. But I think Purdue is a game that you can favor Wisconsin here by double digits. I don't really expect Purdue to be all that good this year. If this game was on the road at Purdue, I definitely would put it in the purple and only favor Wisconsin by a touchdown, but it is a home game here for the Badgers, and Wisconsin definitely has a lot more talent than Purdue compared to last year. So I think Wisconsin will be favored by double digits here. We count these blue games as slight wins here. It's not a guaranteed win. It's not an automatic win here for the Badgers. It's still a very tough game regardless, but again, I think Wisconsin will be favored by at least a couple of touchdowns in this game against Purdue. We now go to the games where Wisconsin will be favored by at least a touchdown at 60% here in the purple. And I got one game on here, and that's Nebraska here on the road. So I think Wisconsin will be favored here in this game on the road at Nebraska, even though it's on the road. And I know the game went into overtime last year, but let's be honest, based off of where Nebraska has been in the last few years, this program has just not been able to turn things around, haven't made it to a bowl game in a while. And based off of last year, I think Wisconsin is definitely the more talented roster. They probably have more talented players than Nebraska does, but I was very close to putting this game as a 50-50 game, but it's really a kind of a tough one to call. So I think this game is a purple game here for Wisconsin. I think they'll be favored by at least a touchdown here in this game here in the purple. Let's go to the games now where Wisconsin will be underdogs in. I don't have any red or orange games on the schedule in the 1% and 20% category, but I do have some yellow games on here. So let's go to the games now where Wisconsin will be a heavy underdog in by about a touchdown at 40% in the yellow. And I know you got a couple of them on this schedule, Alabama and Oregon. These are your two biggest games here. 2 out of their 3 biggest games here in the yellow. Both of these teams just have a lot of talent. Both of these teams, their rosters are more talented than Wisconsin is. And again, Alabama in the non-conference is a very tough one. I know Alabama is going to have Kalen DeBoer taking over as the head coach. But again, Alabama is going to have the talent still. And I think this is definitely a game that Wisconsin will be an underdog in. And the reason why I'm putting both of these games here in the yellow is just because they're playing at home in both of these games. And I think they do have a chance to maybe pull off an upset here in both of these games. Not saying they're going to win them and not saying they're going to lose to them, but based off of these 2 games being at home, you can have a really good shot for Wisconsin to pull off some upsets here. But Alabama in the non-conference and then Oregon here. Again, they get a bye week before playing this Oregon game, which I really think it's a really good spot for a bye week if you're a Wisconsin fan. And again, that's a big-time game there in the month of November against this Oregon team and a potentially an upset alert type game as well in the month of November. So both of these games, these are very talented rosters in Alabama and Oregon. And again, I think based off of the talent-wise, I think Alabama and Oregon will be slight favorites here in both of these games. If both of these games were on the road, they definitely would be in the orange, but both of these games will be in the yellow for me just because they're both at home. So those 2 games, I think Wisconsin will be a heavy underdog in by about a touchdown. And then the rest of the games here in the white, these are all 50-50 games in my opinion. USC, Rutgers, Northwestern, Penn State, Iowa, and then Minnesota. These are all 50-50 games for me that I think can go either way. And you got a total of 6 50-50 games here, so they probably split these 50-50 games. I think they can at least win 3 out of the 6 games here in the 50-50 category. Again, you got some tough road games in those 50-50 games with USC, Rutgers, Northwestern, and Iowa, but they are all very winnable games in my opinion. I think this conference is definitely going to be wide open, but maybe the conference is not really wide open with those top teams, but in the mid-tier teams, I think Wisconsin with all these teams that you're seeing in the white, these are all definitely very winnable games. So again, I think they split all these 50-50 games. I think they win at least 3 out of the 6 games here in the 50-50 category. So let's now get a projection here for Wisconsin for 2024. And again, this is not an official prediction. This is simply a projection based on the schedule. And so we count the green games as wins, and then you count that 1 blue game against Purdue as a slight win. And then we average out that 1 purple game at 60% against Nebraska. Then you average out the 40% games in the yellow at 40%. And again, you split those 50-50 games. 3 out of the 6, they win those 50-50 games. And then you average out all the 50-50 games here at 50%. And the overall projected record that you get for Wisconsin for 2024 is 7-5 here. So 7-5, the same projection for me as last year. And again, Alabama and Oregon makes the schedule here very tough for Wisconsin. That's the reason why the projection comes out to be at 7-5 instead of 8-4 or 9-3 or something like that. If they didn't have both of these teams in the schedule this year, I think Wisconsin's projection would probably be 9-3 or 8-4. And again, if you do avoid Alabama and Oregon on the schedule, I mean, that definitely does bode well for them, but you don't avoid them, so that's the reason why projection came out to be 7-5. But based on those 50-50 games, that's the reason why this projection came out to be at 7-5 as well. So again, this is my projected record here for Wisconsin for 2024. Again, it's 7-5 here, the same projection I had last year for Wisconsin. I do expect the Badgers to be probably a top 25 team. They do got some transfers coming in. You got Tyler Van Dyke, the quarterback coming from Miami, so I think he'll bode well for them as well if he plays his best. So give me your thoughts on this Wisconsin team down in the comments below. What do you think their projected record is for 2024? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports channel.